It's Monday, and we're already back in fight preparation mode as UFC Jacksonville is coming up here on Wednesday, man. How you doing?
Doing great, man. The fights were crazy good. Looking forward to another card. I mean, it's not really on the same level, but fights are fights, and I'm happy to be here to break it down with you guys.
Gotta say, kudos to you, Pete, calling Alexei Oleinik. I was a little bit, in a way, a non-believer, a little bit with you, but man, you called that one.
Hey, man, you should take some chances every now and then, and by now you should see that if I put a lot of research in, take a shot in one lineup, and your golden rule prevailed again. Avoid the first fight, and we'll see if it works this week.
Man, I don't know if you can fade the first fight this week. That's going to be a tough one to fade. Like Chase Sherman versus Ike Villanueva. I don't know how you're going to fade that fight. We're going to talk about that a little later on. Of course, last week was one of those weeks where you didn't have to spend all of your 50,000. Especially if you had Oleinik and you had Justin Gaethje in your lineup. Man, you could put Cejudo in there. You could put, Francis Ngannou in there. I mean, it was, as we always talk about it, it's not just that race to 600, it's that race to 650. And so we're going to try to help you out. Get to those 650 points here coming up on Wednesday. Of course, Anthony Smith, Glover Teixeira is our main event coming up on Wednesday. $9,000 for Anthony Smith on DK. $7,200 for Glover Teixeira and $19 and $15 respectively on FanDuel. This is, and Pete, we always have this conversation of, can you go into a UFC fight card and potentially kind of not take a fighter in a main event? Like, to me, I think you have to take Anthony Smith or you move on. I just, for Glover Teixeira to win this, he's got to get the fight to the ground. I can't visualize a fight where it stays on the feet and Glover wins the fight.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a main event or title fights, it's very, very difficult to avoid those. I mean, we spoke about it last week. You essentially need them in your lineup if you want to have the optimal lineup. For this week, if you're believing in Teixeira, you're expecting that he's going to get some takedowns and take Anthony Smith down and grind him out. And over the years, we've really seen Glover Teixeira change his strategy, where he used to be content striking and throwing and trading some beautiful boxing combinations. But as you get older and you start getting hit by some of these guys, getting knocked out by Rumble Johnson and getting hurt by several people in several fights, you start to take that smarter approach and, try to have some longevity in the sport. So I think that's what Teixeira is trying to do, trying to take people down to his world on the ground. He's a great grappler, good submissions. The value's there at 7,200 if you believe he's going to get a takedown. I can't really hate on you for that. In my opinion, I think that Anthony Smith is going to be very well prepared here. I think he's going to be able to clip Teixeira on the feet, stop some takedowns. Anthony Smith has been training with our buddy, or I shouldn't say our buddy, but somebody that we really hold to a high standard. That's James Krause. On the coaching level, we really believe in James Krause and everything that he does over there at Glory. He's a great coach, been working extensively with Anthony Smith on cage defense, cage takedowns. And I think a lot of people will underestimate Anthony Smith's ground game. We know that he's an explosive striker, but he does have that black belt in his back pocket if he needs to. Just came off a submission victory. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Anthony Smith prevent some takedowns, maybe even get a few of his own, and work towards a submission or some ground and pound.
One of the things that I always talk about is I love to look at the betting odds for a fight. There's a couple of things I'm looking for. The under 2.5 rounds. That doesn't relate to this one. If you do, I found a line earlier. It was plus 100, for under 2.5 rounds. But one thing that sticks out to me is if you look at percentage by finish based on the betting odds, 59% is for Anthony Smith of win by finish. Only 10% wins by decision. On the other side, Glover Teixeira, 20% chance to win by finish, 10% win by decision. And one of the things of when you look at those under 2.5 odds throughout this fight card, the odd makers seem to think that a lot of these fights are either going to go the distance or going to go late into the third round. So, we are hunting for who are those fighters that are going to get the finish. That's why for me, I think Anthony Smith will be a staple in pretty much all of my lineups.
Yeah, I can't blame you there. And I think that Anthony Smith will be one of those guys that I lock in using that fantasy cruncher tool over at Osmo. I mean, it's honestly my favorite tool over at Osmo. I go through the fights and sometimes I have scratch out fights. So I'll deselect some fighters, or I will, make sure I want somebody in my lineup if I think they have a high ceiling or even a high floor for that matter. And Anthony Smith this week is one of those guys I want in my lineup. I just think he gets it done. And I think, backing the younger guy makes sense also.
And of course, that's a great feature you mentioned about Fantasy Crunch there, Osmo.com. Just it's something you got to take advantage of, especially if there's, if you say, hey, I want Anthony Smith in my lineup, lock him in and figure out the lineups that do come out. Of course, if you do have a question about the fights, hit it up here in the YouTube chat. Also, be sure to hit that thumbs up to let us know that you're liking what you're seeing here. But to me, it's Anthony Smith. It's also, look, it's a key matchup at 205 pounds. And if Glover Teixeira is going to make one more run at the UFC light heavyweight title, he has to win here, Pete.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this would be a huge win over Anthony Smith. I can't imagine how it wouldn't catapult him to the top of the division. And it'd be nice to see Anthony Smith get a nice win here and maybe show off some new skill sets, maybe get some takedowns, start to up his volume a little bit, because neither one of these guys are really high volume guys. They're such power driven that when they land the big shots, when they follow up, but they are, they set up that shot. They feint, they fake. Glover's probably going to be looking to defend some big shots from Anthony Smith and shoot underneath and take him down. So it's an exciting matchup for sure, but I'm backing Anthony Smith.
Yeah, a question we got on YouTube from Ricky: why Anthony Smith so bad? Sorry, I'm not hit to MMA that much. And Ricky, appreciate you tuning in tonight. I mean, I know that because of our sports world, there's probably a lot of people playing MMA DFS that weren't aware. I mean, look, and you're looking for finishers. And me and Pete were talking earlier today. We're like, okay, who are the fighters you feel pretty good about getting a finish? Anthony Smith, and there's a couple other ones you feel good about, but this is one of these cards you almost kind of feel like it could be a lot of signals. So I think when you're talking about you want to have fighters in your lineup that have that ability to score 100 points, Anthony Smith is that. I would be pretty surprised if Anthony Smith doesn't walk away with a victory and walks away with a stoppage victory.
Yeah, I would agree. I think either way, whether he gets it done via decision or he gets it finished, I think you're going to need him. He's going to be optimal, and I think that he's going to score pretty well for you.
Another question for you, Pete, here in the chat from Hunter. How sure are you that Anthony is the better striker? For me, the further it goes, the better Anthony's chances are.
Well, I would say the boxing advantage definitely goes to Glover Teixeira when it comes to technique. But when I'm talking power, and also, strike and defense, I think that Anthony Smith can take a shot better than Glover can right now at this point of his career. And I think that, Teixeira is probably going to hit Anthony Smith. It's a fight. And when Anthony Smith returns fire, I think Teixeira is going to get clipped. We saw him shoot in for takedowns and get wobbled, and in my opinion should have been stopped due to elbow strikes. And I can literally see the same exact thing happening for Anthony Smith, of Glover getting desperate, shooting it against the cage, pinning him there, and then Anthony Smith just unleashing those elbows to the temple, and fight's over.
I know we got a question about Alexander Hernandez and Trudeau. We're going to get into that fight momentarily, but before we get to that fight, I do want to talk about the co-main event: Ben Rothwell versus Ovince St. Preux, aka OSP. This is an interesting fight, and I'm not quite sure why OSP is a favorite here by the margin that he is. That to me is kind of interesting. One of the things that concerns me about OSP in this fight, I should note, 8,700 on DraftKings for OSP, 7,500 for Ben Rothwell, $17 on FanDuel, $14 for Rothwell. And this one is, my concern is that there's more times than not that you see OSP find his way to where his back is against the cage. And my concern is, I mean, look, Ben Rothwell is probably a guy that if he's not cutting the 265, he's going to be in that high 250, 260 range, where OSP probably 230-ish, maybe 235-ish if he's put on some pounds. Is to me that he gets stuck against the cage, and that Ben Rothwell is able to make this a dirty fight and just kind of grind his way and just wear down OSP as the fight goes on.
Yeah, it's a very odd situation because you have OSP making his debut as a heavyweight, going up against possibly the one of the biggest heavyweights that are in the UFC in Ben Rothwell. I know that everybody's back in Open St. Preux thinking that because he's the younger guy, he's the more notable name, I would say, the more exciting name. You want to get behind him. You think that he can go and get some fancy submissions or possibly get a big knockout. But Ben Rothwell is no slouch, and I think that people need to not underestimate Ben Rothwell. He's seen it all within the heavyweight division. He's faced literally everybody, and Ben's going to be a bigger guy in there. He's going to look humongous compared to OSP. OSP is 6'3", Rothwell 6'4", but when I tell you the size and the width of Rothwell, he's just going to want to lay against OSP against the cage, pin him there, work some dirty boxing, and then just light him up on the feet. A lot of people don't realize that Rothwell has a high volume when it comes to striking. He's averaging like around 70 significant strikes a fight in his past 4. So Ben Rothwell, this is a very tricky fight. I don't know if I necessarily love it for DFS because I'm not sure if finish comes here, but I will not be backing OSP. I kind of want to take a wait and see approach to see how his debut goes in the heavyweight division. I don't want to really risk any money by backing him. I don't see him necessarily taking Rothwell down and subbing him. Rothwell has some slick submissions as well, but I think Rothwell could survive or just do enough to get it done and get a close decision.
Did you see the comment Rothwell made recently about why OSP is coming up to heavyweight?
No, I didn't.
He goes, because he thinks all these light heavyweights think the heavyweights suck. That's why they're all coming up.
Hey, good point. I mean, that's kind of like popular opinion, though. And a lot of people think that they can come up to heavyweight and just have instant success. And, it's going to be tough for OSP against Ben Rothwell. I mean, he's older, but I don't think he's just totally washed. So tread lightly if you're back in OSP.
Yeah, it's definitely there's some high price options that I definitely like in this card. OSP is not one of them. Lincoln in the chat says I'm not a fan of the upper pricing this card. Am I crazy if I leave 2,000 on the table? I think that's one of the things in DFS. We're always like, oh, we have $50,000 to spend. Let me try to spend as much. But there's some times where maybe you don't have to spend 50,000. Maybe you only spend 40, 48,000, 47,000. I don't think you're crazy. I do like some high-end options here, but I also think that there's some high-end options like we'll get into later, like Sajara Eubanks. Do you want to pay up for her at 9,200? Do you think that she is going to bring the point value for that salary? Lincoln, I don't think you're crazy to sit there and maybe say you only spend 48,000. I think it's just maximizing what your line going to ultimately be. You don't have to always feel like you have to spend all of your money.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'd have to tell you that anytime you leave money or salary on the table for a DFS lineup, that's typically going to mean that, the more money you leave out there, the more contrarian your lineup's going to be. If you're always spending that 49.9 or that 50,000, that probably going to be split with a lot of different people. Now, not to say that it's a good strategy to always leave money on the table, but if you have a lineup that you like and you back some fighters and you really believe and did your homework and you think that, these 6 guys are going to get it done for me, I don't care, what the salary is. Look at last week. Just trust your gut and don't let that number fool you.
I mean, just look at last week. There was a lot of great low price options that ultimately came in to cash in. Of course, be sure to sign up for the Awesemo Plus MMA weekly package for $8.95. We got two UFC fight cards this week, so check out that weekly package for $8.95, where you get access to all the Awesemo coveted tools. Go to awesemo.com/join to take advantage of this offer, and be sure to follow Awesemo on Twitter at awesemo_com. We talked about it earlier. That fantasy cruncher, I'm telling you, that's the one tool that I love going on looking at. Love looking at projections, the top 6 ownership now that Alex has up there as well. But that fantasy cruncher, I'm telling you, that is a tool you got to use. See all the type of lineups that you can create. And I know me and Pete were using that earlier today, especially with Alexander Hernandez versus Drew Dober. Alexander Hernandez is 7,900. Drew Dober, 8,300. That's, of course, on DraftKings, on FanDuel. 17 for Dober, 15 for Alex Hernandez. And Alex Hernandez is a fighter that came onto the scene, took a fight in the UFC on short notice, comes in, knocks out Beneil Dariush. I think, unfortunately for Alexander, everyone remembers his last two fights. They remember the leap to Donald Cerrone, where he was doing a great job of selling himself. And Alex is a very good promoter of himself. And then, of course, goes out there and loses Cerrone. Did not look good at all. Then he comes back against Francisco Trinaldo, wins a close decision. A lot of people hated the fight. And I had a chance to talk to Alex about 3 weeks ago. It was when he was initially supposed to take on it was kind of after the whole UFC 249 debacle kind of happened with not happening on April 18th and all that. And one of my big takeaways was he's talked about how over this last 16, 17 weeks of kind of really how his mindset has changed a lot. And his coach, Jason Yerington, has really been emphasizing various things. But this is a quality matchup with Drew Dober. This is one of those fights I almost feel like you got to look at one of the sides and put them on a roster.
Yeah, I think the pace of this fight's going to be crazy. Drew Dober coming off a beautiful, beautiful knockout over Nasrat Haqparast. That's definitely what people are remembering from Drew Dober. 8,300, he has great value there. Hernandez at 7,900 is my little sneaky play. He's my under 8,000 play that I really, really like this week. And the reason I like that is because if you look at Drew Dober's career, historically, he's really struggled against some grapplers if they can get him to the mat, and especially if they can push the pace. Now, both of these guys are pretty big 155ers. Alex Hernandez at 7,900 is going to be, I think, overlooked because of, what you said, that cowboy knockout in his last performance. He hasn't really put out a nice performance since that. The Trinaldo fight was kind of like a sleeper. So I like Alexander Hernandez here. He's only averaging 63 fantasy points, but that doesn't mean that history is going to repeat itself and that he's going to only go out there and get 60 points. If he gets a couple takedowns or some transitions, he really has a good ground game that I can see him submitting Drew Dober. Now, with saying that, Drew Dober should be in somebody's lineup, and I would probably have a lineup with Drew Dober and a lineup with Hernandez, just because I think, either one of these guys, this is one of these must-have fights, in my opinion. The pace of Hernandez, in my opinion, is going to be too much for Dober to handle. I think Hernandez is going to rack up some points for us and take Dober to deep water and possibly submit him.
Obviously, you're the fighter. We'd like to get the fighter's perspective here. Alex Hernandez does have a 2-inch reach advantage. Big deal or no big deal?
I would say no big deal for him because he doesn't want to strike with Drew Dober. I mean, yes, he can stay and compete on the feet, but if he was a striker, I would say it would be more of a big deal. But he'll probably just use the straight punches to set up his takedown or get Drew Dober to commit or overcommit and duck under a hook, pin him against the cage, and work for some takedowns. So give me Hernandez at 7,900.
Then we got Ricky Simon versus Ray Borg. This, of course, will be at 135 pounds. Ricky Simon, 8,600. Ray Borg, 7,600 on DK. On FanDuel, 17 for Ricky Simon and 13 for Borg. A sizable reach advantage for Ricky Simon in this. But, when Ray Borg has been able to score a lot of points, it is due to takedowns, but also those advances that he's making on the ground. The problem is I look at this fight and say, let's just say he goes with 10 takedown attempts. How many of those can he get on the ground? And also, I think that on the FanDuel side, if your feeling is Ricky Simon is going to stop a lot of takedowns, you got to look at that FanDuel scoring. If you wanted to put Ricky Simon in your MVP spot, a takedown defense is worth 4.5 points. Or if he's just a regular fighter on your roster, 3 points. So it's when you look at the scoring differences between FanDuel and DraftKings, that's one of the things to look at. Also, the fact of you get 5 points for submission attempt is also something to kind of pay attention to that we saw with guys like Bryce Mitchell on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a very intriguing matchup between Ricky Simon and Ray Borg. I think Ray Borg will be pretty popular. I mean, he's 7,600. The value is crazy. Based on his grappling approach and his strategy. He hits so many takedowns, so many advances. And if you look, he's taken down Demetrius Johnson. So I think that's going to be, the deciding factor for a lot of people putting him in your lineup. You're going to be like, I think this guy can do it. Now, he may take Ricky Simon down, but let me tell you, Ricky Simon has some really good takedown defense, and he has the ability to get back to his feet. His fight against Merab Balashvili, Merab took him down, I don't know how many times, but couldn't keep him on the mat. And Ricky Simón was tough. Then after that, you saw Ricky make some adjustments in the Hani Yahya fight. Hani Yahya could not land a takedown, and I think Ricky Simón defended like 10 or so takedowns and just was sprawling and looking excellent, forcing his man to stand up. I think Ricky's going to give Ray Borg a warm welcome to the 135-pound division. Ray Borg should be at the 125-pound division. We have seen Ray struggle in the past with commitment to training as well, not really being all in. Granted, he has some motivation behind him now with some family issues, so I think that he may be reinvigorated. But I just think Ricky Simón is going to be a little bit too much for him. Too big, too strong, too good of a striker. I will have Ray Borg in a few lineups because of the potential, and he may get Ricky Simón down. I just think Simon's going to be too strong to hold down, and I like Simon's chances of winning the fight. It's another fight I think you have to look at. I think it's going to be a high-scoring fight. Even at 8,600, I can see Ricky Simón getting at least 80 or so points, maybe more.
Yeah. Another question coming in here. I don't see a lot of knockouts happening this event. I don't disagree with that.
It's weird. I think if you look at the odds, it's almost like the odds makers have no idea what's going on with this card either. It's just like an ugly, odd event, no pun intended. But last week you saw some juicy odds and some big favorites. And it's just crazy to me that Eubanks, yes, she has a better skill set than Sarah Morris. We'll get to that, but she's a -400 favorite with a 5-4 record. That's crazy to me. So it just goes to show you that this card is like toss-ups all over the place.
Up next, we've got to Marvin Vettori versus Carl Roberson. Marvin Vettori, 8,900, 7,300 for Carl Roberson. Of course, that's on DK. Over on the FanDuel side of the equation, $17 for Vettori, $14 for Roberson. This is one of those fights that, I really feel Vittori's got to grapple. I don't think it's the best game plan to sit there and say, hey, let's have a kickboxing matchup with the kickboxer in this matchup. But I think Marvin Vettori may be a guy that if you're looking for, especially on the FanDuel side in that MVP spot, that might have very low ownership. And if he can score a bunch of takedowns, might cash in well for you.
Yeah, I really like Vettori this week a lot. Same exact price as Calvin Kattar was last week, and Calvin Kattar really came through for us. He looked excellent. Marvin Vettori in this matchup, I honestly think that he can have his way with Carl Roberson. He definitely has the wrestling and grappling advantage. We've seen that. I mean, if you even look back on the Israel Adesanya fight, it was a very, very close fight. Some people believe that Vettori won the fight. His grappling and his striking, he's just able to – he's a complete guy. I mean, whereas Carl Roberson is really just a specialist, a striker, just an explosive striker, and I really think that he's overrated. I think Vettori pushes such a high pace, can make Roberson gas out, can take him down, let him up, beat him up, take him down, rinse and repeat. I just think Vettori at 8,900 is a sneaky play. I'm going to have a lot of Vettori.
Then we've got a heavyweight matchup, Andrei Arlovski versus Phillipe Liens. Phillipe Liens coming in here as the guy that I think a lot of people are going to point to as potentially someone to be a staple in a lot of your lineups. 8,500 for Phillipe Liens, 7,700 for Arlovski, $16 on FanDuel for Liens, and $14 for Arlovski. Phillipe Liens, I mean, I think really the question mark is, do you believe he can stop Arlovski in this fight?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Arlovski's coming off that stoppage loss to Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I think that Phillipe Liens is going to be slightly overlooked because people need 7,000 options to plug in their lineups. Most people may not even do research and know who Phillipe Liens is, but he just won the PFL heavyweight tournament, $1 million winner. Good striker, very good striker, and he actually impressed me on film. He throws with a high volume that can match Arlovski because Arlovski over the years doesn't really have pop anymore. He makes up for that with high volume. And I think that Phillipe Liens can match it and can also crack. So where he can match the volume and then add some power behind his shots and drop Arlovski. Granted, I expect this to be a very, very, very aggressive fight. I think it's going to be on the feet the whole time. If I had to pick a stoppage, I would say I would lean towards Liens. Arlovski's volume is a problem, though. If you let him go, and it's like a snowball going down a mountain. So, I would say have Arlovski in one lineup just because of potential that he gets it done. He always wins close decisions somehow, which I don't understand. But he has been absolutely terrible within his past like 13 fights. I think he has 3 victories and like 10 losses or something crazy like that. I really like Phillipe Liens here at 8,500. I think he might be lost in the shuffle. Give me Phillipe Liens at 8,500, and yeah, let's do it.
And of course, over at awesemo.com, we've got the projections already up there from Alex. Chances, odds of a KO, 42% for Phillipe Liens, 19% for Andrei Arlovski. I would imagine that, when you're looking, for that 8,000 to 8,600 salaries, I think Liens is going to be very popular.
Yeah, I mean, I would say knowledgeable people would pick Liens and avoid Arlovski because Arlovski has been dropped and knocked out by so many people, and you can only take so many shots in that heavyweight division. I think that's why Arlovski has somewhat made adjustments and really gone to the volume and, pitter-patter type of approach, but his chin's still there to get hit, and I saw Phillipe Liens have some great counters. I definitely would be shocked if Arlovski got a stoppage, but these two gentlemen used to train together in American Top Team. They might even still train together at American Top Team. I know that Liens is at American Top Team and Arlovski, I believe, as well. So they just might be at different branches of ATT, but they definitely know each other. But give me the younger guy in Liens. I think he can ride the momentum of the tournament and get it done.
Interesting comment here on the chat. With a coin flip card like this, whoever wins the 100K on DK certainly earned it. Yeah, I would agree. This is one of these cards where you if you can get, you really dive into it, and I know, Pete, you do this every week of breaking down all these fights, to kind of find, who is going to be, that person under 8,000 is going to get the win, because that's what you're looking for. You have to have those fighters in your lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to point out the critical fights, and I think this might be one of the critical fights that could make or break your lineup. If you guys need any help when it comes to data or statistics or whatnot, take a look at the spreadsheet that we provided for you guys. Take a screenshot, pause it, whatever you guys need to do, but it's there for you guys.
And you talk about one of those fights that you got to really look at of rostering, and it's this matchup between Michael Johnson and Thiago Moses. Thiago 8,200, Johnson 8,000, $16 for Thiago, 15 for Michael here. It's a straight pick'em fight. Michael Johnson obviously has been around the UFC for a long time. When you tell me the name Michael Johnson, fast hand speed is the first thing I think of. But also, he does get taken down a lot.
Yeah, man, I'm a big Michael Johnson fan. He used to just go out there and just light people up. His hand speed's crazy, his volume's crazy, but he hasn't been Michael Johnson lately, and it's been quite some time. I mean, if you look, he's 20-15, and he's dropped a lot over the past 5 or 6 fights. Thiago Moises is a highly touted prospect that really hasn't materialized into that prospect that he was supposed to be. Close salaries. This is a fight I keep going back and forth on. It's hard to back Michael Johnson until you really see, some changes or that old spark or something. But in saying that, I'll have some Michael Johnson. On the other side of it, with Thiago Moises, I like him at 8,200 because of his grappling advantage, in my opinion. His jiu-jitsu advantage. I've seen him win some jiu-jitsu tournaments, sub some guys. And I think that he's the more polished striker when it comes to overall kickboxing, whereas Mike Johnson relies a lot on his hands. The thing is Mike Johnson needs to get back to pumping that jab and working what a lefty can do and that straight left hand down the middle. I just don't know if he does it.
I think this has decision written all over it. And if you look at our projections on awesemo.com, it really loses that. We talk about, the odds of finish. I mean, it's 23% for Thiago Moses and 17% for Michael Johnson. So, look, it's, I think there is an upside to Michael Johnson. Can he connect with those hands? Because if he does, he can put Thiago out. I mean, Thiago's one of these guys that, when he came into the UFC, my hopes were higher than what he's been able to accomplish. And this is also another South Florida, ATT versus with Hard Knocks 365. I think they're now called it's they've got a branding name behind it, Sanford Orthopedics,
Yeah.
or something along those lines. That gym has gone through several names over the years, Black Zillions, and there's been 4 or 5 names of that gym. But the one thing I like about Michael Johnson is that I will have him in at least one lineup. It's because I know that if he lands one of those hands, he can win this fight by knockout.
Absolutely. The potential's there. The talent is there. But can you pull the trigger under the lights? Maybe this is what Mike Johnson needs. No crowd, no pressure. Go in there like it's practice. Go in there like you're just sparring your teammates. I don't know. I'm not sure. I will have a lineup with both of these guys. I'll have a lineup with Moises because I think that the potential is there for him to actually put it all together finally. He's been training at ATT. He's only gotten better, and he's had some tough fights, in the UFC. He hasn't really had an easy approach. Mike Johnson's just been dropping fights. Stevie Ray is the last one. So who knows with this matchup? I'm leaning slightly to Moises. I think that maybe he'll take him down and just make it a jiu-jitsu fight.
And then we got Sajara Eubanks at 9,200 taking on Sarah Morris, $7,020 on FanDuel for Sajara. Then for Sarah, $11. I did have a chance to talk to Sarah about 2 weeks ago in preparation for his fight. She has been preparing in Las Vegas. A lot of garage training with her. Her boyfriend's also a professional fighter. She kind of joked about how at points the car is being used as the wall to work on if you do find yourself back up against the fence. And I know one of the questions that we did get here was, in terms of, are there any fights that are a complete fade? I don't know if I would say a complete fade, but this is one of those fights on the card that, because of the pricing of Sajara Eubanks, I don't know if I'm ready to spend up because she is a top salary on this card. To me, I'd rather have Anthony Smith at $200 less.
Yeah, it makes sense. The skill discrepancy is huge here, in my opinion. And I think Eubanks, on paper, is the better martial artist than Morris. It's just that, the trend of female fights going the distance. If you look at some of the statistics for Eubanks, she hasn't really put out so much volume to make a high salary worth it. But there's always exceptions to the rule. And maybe this is a matchup that she can really expose Morris. Eubanks does have good hands, but she has great ground game, good aggressiveness, takedowns. I'll have Eubanks in several lineups because she's the top salary fighter. And I think that it's not like she's going up against a fighter that I really feel comfortable with that has any chance in there against Eubanks. I think Morris just really survives on toughness. I'm not paying $7,000 for Morris, even though she's coming off a nice performance. Morris likes to scramble on the mat and everything, but I think Eubanks is just going to be a step ahead standing, step ahead on the mat. Just don't know if you get a point total that really justifies the 9,200 salary. I may be surprised, and she may put Morris away in the second or third after accumulating a lot. Who knows? But it's definitely scratch Morris out and plug Eubanks in if anybody.
You prefer Eubanks in cash over GPP?
Yeah, I think Eubanks is an easy cash play because you can basically give her a check mark that she's going to get it done. She's one of the fighters on the card that, she's a minus 400 favorite, basically, that's going to go in there and just put on a show. Points wise, though, you don't know. You never know. She could just be, floating around that 80 or so range. But if she really ups the volume or ups some takedowns, and Morris has been training against the cage on how to get back to her feet, or against her car, or whatever you said she's using, the garage, and she's going to be able to get back to her feet, maybe Eubanks can keep planting her on the mat and rack up some points.
And, it should be noted that when you look at, Eubanks' 2 wins in the UFC, scored 83.5, 89.5. Both of those were decision victories. She scored 2 takedowns in one, 3 takedowns in another. This is a fight that you do expect Sajara Eubanks to win. I think the only concern you can have from a DFS aspect is whether or not she'll get those points that you're going to want. Then we've got Omar Morales versus Gabriel Benitez. Omar Morales, 8,800. Benitez, 7,400. Morales is $16 on FanDuel. $14 for Benitez. Omar Morales was actually supposed to take on Alexander Hernandez back when at UFC 249 when Islam Makhachev was pulled from that card. Of course, Makhachev was supposed to take on Alexander Hernandez. So, but obviously the UFC went a different route with both of these guys. What's your kind of take on this one?
Oh, man. It's a fight where I had Morales in one of my lineups on his previous fight, and he really just didn't deliver at that 8,800 price tag. He had I think the same exact price tag. He's a good striker, decent hands, but he's more kick oriented, where he likes to throw lots of round kicks, hook kicks, spin kicks, front kicks. Whereas Benitez is coming up from 145, so I think automatically people are going to scratch him out and think that he's going to get worked by Morales due to the size discrepancy. But I mean, he could. Benitez was having a lot of success against Sadiq Youssef, though, and before he ended up getting knocked out. I mean, he was clipping Sadiq, working well. He holds his hands tight, comes from a good gym, and he has worked some takedowns in the past. So maybe he was struggling to make 45. Maybe 55 is going to feel more comfortable. I mean, moving up a weight class isn't always a bad thing. But I think Morales should edge this out. Benitez is a southpaw, is more boxing oriented. But it's a fight for me that I don't really feel comfortable about. If I'd have to side with somebody for a stoppage, maybe Morales lands one of these kicks. But for me, I'd just rather I'd actually have Ben Rothwell over Benitez or somebody besides Morales. Vettori definitely over Morales.
Moving up a weight class, that sounds like something you know something about.
Hey, I had to move up to 55, man.
Don't want to cut the 45 anymore?
Oh no, those days are long gone.
I totally get you there. Then we got Hunter Azure versus Bryan Keller. Hunter Azure 90,100, 7,100 for Keller, 18 for Hunter on FanDuel, 13 for Keller. This is one of those Hunter comes in, had secured a UFC contract on the Contender Series, coming off a win against Brad Katona. This is one of those ones I feel like with Hunter, I think it's more of can he mass some takedowns to really rile up those points. At 9,100, man, it's kind of like Eubanks. You expect them to win. It's to me, it's more a matter of will he score enough to justify that salary.
It's a tough fight, and it's because Keller is no slouch. Even though he's at 7,100, I think Keller would be extremely popular. I mean, when I was crunching earlier, he was popping up everywhere, and for good reason. I mean, he has that submission ability and always come from behind toughness. Here in this matchup against the 8-0 Hunter Azure, expensive price tag for Azure, but Azure should hold the wrestling advantage, even though Keller is a good grappler. I think what could happen is in this matchup is that Keller works back to his feet numerous times, and Azure could rinse and repeat, keep taking him down, racking up points. And that's how, with the big striking exchanges, he ends up paying off his price point. I like almost every single fighter above 8,900. And usually we find, fighters on the card that we're hating on in those price ranges. I like Vettori. I like Anthony Smith. I like Sajar Eubanks. And I even like Hunter Azure. So this is a rare week where I like the 9,000 options. And I think that the high price 9,000 options might surprise some people if they go their grappling routes. Hunter Azure seems to be like the younger guy that can dominate, take him down, former state champion for wrestling. He has the accolades and should be able to work Keller here.
I think the question, and we always talk about this every time we do a show, is those high 9,000 options or 89 and up is who's going to be that fighter that's going to have the least ownership, and it might be Hunter.
I don't know. That's a good question. I think Vettori might be slightly overlooked, and the reason is the quality of opponent. And Roberson, his opponent, might be decently popular because of his knockout ability. I mean, you want the 7,000 guys that can get you finishes. And of the 7,000 options, he's one of the highest that can get you a knockout win. I don't see that happening. But yeah, you could play with the ownership, but if you like some fighters and you're crunching over at Awesemo, lock them in, and see where you can make adjustments and modify projections and so on and so forth.
Of course, we have one more fight left to break down. Of course, after that fight, we are going to answer questions that are there on the YouTube chat. So go ahead and fire those questions right now. Be sure to hit that thumbs up button here on YouTube. But the opening fight of the night, heavyweight matchup, Chase Sherman, 8,400, taking on Ike Villanueva, 7,800. On FanDuel, Sherman, $16, Villanueva, $15. And look, my golden rule is always you never take the first fight of the night, but this is one of those weeks I think you can't avoid the first fight of the night. I expect that the winner of this fight is going to win within the first 7.5 minutes, if it even gets to the second round. I feel a knockout's going to come. Of course, when Chase Sherman, back in the UFC in his first stint in the UFC, it was, this was a guy who's going to throw a lot of punches, and he did score well, with the amount of punches that he's throwing. Ike Villanueva, UFC debut. He's a 205 pounder. Age was obviously a concern here. He's 36 years old. I've talked to Ike on a couple of occasions, and Ike knew that he was sitting there and he was at an age where it was going to be a short notice opportunity. And him and his coach, Daniel Pineda, the former UFC fighter, they liked this opportunity. And one of the things when I talked to Ike that really stuck out to me was, I got to be patient. I can't try to force something that's not there.
Yeah, I listened to the interview. It was a great interview, and I became a fan of Ike after listening to it. 7,800 for the newcomer against Sherman at 8,400. I think people are going to be flocking to Sherman. I mean, and I think it's because he's been competing in bare knuckle as well. In my opinion, that actually may hurt him more than it can help him in this situation. I mean, this is an MMA fight. This isn't a bare knuckle brawl where you're just boxing. So if Villanueva was smart in this matchup, he'd go out there and start leg kicking him. He'd start faking takedowns, maybe work his cage defense or his wrestling just to really exhaust him, make him exhausted, and then make him strike with you. I think Ike has a great chance of knocking out Sherman here. I really do. I will have a lot of Ike in my lineups. I'll probably have like 70% Villanueva versus 30% Sherman. Just because I think this fight ends or it scores high. It's going to be on the feet, in my opinion. And I wouldn't be surprised if it does go to the distance, of each guy having like 100 significant strikes. It could just be a brawl, like an instant classic. Villanueva is one of my 7,000 options that I like, could get a sneaky KO.
Before we get into listener questions, do want to mention this FanDuel MVP top candidates. Let's take Anthony Smith, because I think that's going to be the popular people that everyone go to towards that MVP. I think another name you got to consider, Marvin Vettori.
Yeah, I think so, especially the scoring that you were mentioning before of, attempts, takedowns, takedown defenses, you know what I mean? Like defended takedowns. I think that there are various ways to go for that MVP spot over at FanDuel. I mean, if I'm going top to bottom, I think Anthony Smith is possibly my favorite safe play on the card. I think Ben Rothwell is another under the radar type of play where we've seen St. Preux get knocked out and hurt and stumbled in the past. How's he going to fare against the heavyweights? I think Hernandez with the attempted submissions as well. I think, honestly, what you mentioned before, Ricky Simon is a sneaky, sneaky captain because Ray Borg's not going to want to stand where Ricky Simon is going to be shooting takedowns. And if he can defend anything like how he did against Hani Yahya, man, you're going to shoot through the roof with those points. So I really think there are some really good options on this card for FanDuel.
Yeah, and it's something you got to pay attention to because FanDuel scoring is a little different than DK. Yeah. There is obviously a ton of emphasis on that first round finish, but you got to look at things like submission attempts and also takedown defenses. Of course, I want to let you know about the special offer that Awesemo.com does have for you right now. All you got to do is sign up for an Awesemo Plus MMA weekly package for $8.95, where you'll get access to all of the tremendous coveted tools that we have over at Awesemo.com. Go to Awesemo.com/join to take advantage of this offer and follow Awesemo on Twitter at Awesemo_. _comments. We mentioned that Fantasy Crunchers definitely is a tool that you got to check out when you're trying to create those various lineups. But, Pete, let's get into some of the questions that we have received on YouTube. Of course, be sure to hit that thumbs up here on YouTube. First question that hit up here is from Steelers 360. How do you feel about this lineup? Smith, Morris, Azure, Rothwell, Dober, Arlovski.
Hold on. I'm trying to find that. Say it again for me.
All right. We got Anthony Smith.
Yep.
Sarah Morris.
Oh.
Hunter Azure.
Okay.
Ben Rothwell.
Yeah.
Drew Dober. Andrei Arlovski.
I think if he switched out Dober and went Hernandez, you can make a change from Morris, because I'm not a big Morris fan. I think that you're really hoping a lot goes right or some scrambles, but yet again, it is it's a women's bout, so anything can happen. They're usually tightly contested fights. I'm not big on that Morris pick, to be honest. That would be a big underdog to come out victorious.
Yeah, another one. Thiago Moses taking him down. Talking about Michael Johnson. Johnson will not stop it. In my opinion, his condition is there too. I want to see a little bit more out of Thiago. I mean, I think it's in a way it's kind of tough to trust him. But with Michael Johnson, we've seen he has gets taken down a lot, and I think that's the question I have there.
My boy Hunter said that. Thanks, Hunter, for the comment and question. I was watching some film, and Miles Jury was taking down Michael Johnson a lot. Granted, that was like in 2012. But my point is, I don't think you need to be a wrestler to be taking down Michael Johnson. I think you can just have some grappling savviness to you. And if you are dominant in that area, you can really expose Michael Johnson. Where I think Thiago Moises, he is so good when it comes to jiu-jitsu. If he's been working his takedowns, which I know he has, because American Top Team is one of the best teams in the world, he's a nice play, but you got to watch out for those hands of Johnson.
Next question comes in from Anthony. Top 3 for cash core.
Ooh, top 3. I think you got to have the main event. You got to have Anthony Smith. Cash. I like Vettori. I feel pretty confident in Vettori. And then I'd say that I like Ricky Simone, man. I do. It's going to expose the 125er.
Next up, Lincoln goes, only thing I don't like about Anthony Smith, he doesn't score that high in a win, and Teixeira could get the win and score big. When I think of Glover, I keep thinking that I want to say it's the Carl Roberson fight.
Yeah.
Carl Roberson got off to an unbelievable start, and then Glover got to the fight to the ground. I just think the question is can Glover – how does he how can he get the fight to the ground before potentially taking any damage on the feet?
Yeah, I mean, Glover's going to want to take it to the mat, but can he do it safely? Glover, went in there desperate against Carl Roberson, was there trying to lock his hands on a double leg against the cage. And Roberson was dropping elbows. And granted, Roberson's explosive, but so is Anthony Smith. Yes, Anthony Smith, as of late, hasn't been scoring so high because he's very patient. But you guys are also – you can't compare the John Jones fight. You should almost wipe that out and then judge him based on his other fights besides John Jones. That's a little unfair. I personally think Anthony Smith's going to do well. I sure hope so. And, I think it's going to be a great performance for him.
Seth, question comes in with favorite underdog to get a knockout. There's a couple I point towards. Ike Villanueva is one that I would point towards. I think you got to look at Ben Rothwell, I think, has got to be another one you look at.
I would 100% agree with both of those. I really like Ike in this spot. The only thing is that Ike and Sherman both took the fight on such short notice, but I guess you can really say that about everybody on the card, right, Jason? I mean, it's a little tough. And that's why this card and these cards this week are so difficult, is because you don't really know the training regimen behind everything. But I mean, I've been looking on Instagram and trying to stalk these guys as much as possible to try to get as much information for us. But I like Ike. I really do. I think that the bare knuckle fights for Sherman, I don't think they helped. Maybe you broke your hand. You have so much scar tissue on your face now from it. You know what I'm saying? Like, Ike can just hit him once. I expect Sherman to hit him because he has a higher volume, but I think Ike can just counter shoot, just hit him with a nice little counter right hand, and the fight can be over.
It's a great way to look at it. Cody says, does TJ get a title shot in the near future? I'm guessing that means TJ Dillashaw. It seems to believe that the belief is when he returns in January from that suspension, that he'll be in line there. I mean, obviously 35 is going to be kind of see how this thing plays out. I think part of the, when you talk about if Henry is truly retiring, which look, you listen to him, and I think part of it is definitely this is a guy that's been, competing at a high level for 20 years when you think about his amateur wrestling and now as an MMA fighter. But if the UFC puts enough zeros in that paycheck, Henry's going to fight. And he alluded to that, like basically like, look, I'm good to walk away right now, but if you throw enough zeros on that check, you can get me to talk. So, but with Peter Yan, I always said the international aspect, can they, whether it's Fight Island or can they get him into the United States? I would think that if TJ doesn't get a title fight in his first fight back, if he gets a win second fight.
Yeah, I think he's in the contention, but I don't think right away. Shout out Cody. What's up, buddy?
Next up goes, how do you rank Benitez, Borg, and Rothwell? I
think Rothwell is the best chance to win. I think Borg has the highest ceiling because of his takedown ability, and Benitez is just a puncher's chance going up against Morales, who's slightly inexperienced. You think the same?
Yeah, I think you have to go Rothwell. Just it's heavyweights, and we know how heavyweights go. I mean, Borg. I like what you say about Borg. I just don't see it happening. I would go Rothwell, Benitez, Borg in that one. Dave saying I'm going to have some Rothwell because he has a powerful punch. I go back to is I think this fight's going to play out against the fence. I really do. I think you're going to see a lot of clinching against the fence.
Yeah, and OSP has a very bad habit of staying against the fence. I mean, if you don't have good footwork or you just let somebody cut off your footwork and really just dictate the pace as well. Granted, I don't know if Rothwell is going to go out there and have an old Rothwell type of performance, but in the matchup, I think it might be a little too much for St. Peru's debut.
Hunter said, Ike said he'll fight wherever Chase wanted. In the Sherdog interview, he says he's a 205er versus a guy that wants to bomb and who has UFC experience / training. So there's no way I can take Ike myself. I mean, look, here's the thing. Chase is he's not a huge heavyweight in terms of weight. And this is Chase's getting another opportunity in the UFC. I would say this, when you talk to Ike knows he's probably got 2, maybe 3 fights in the UFC. So, but he's going to be patient in this fight. So don't expect to see a debuting fighter who's going to come out and try to go balls to the wall. I also think it's beneficial to Ike. It's the first fight of the night. There is no sitting around. He knows I'm fighting at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So he's, because obviously how the UFC is shuttling fighters in. I think that's beneficial, Ike, to be the first fight of the night.
Yeah, I think Sherman will be popular. Like I said, I'll have some Sherman. But I think that Ike can get it done because Sherman has this tendency of pitter-patter punches and just trying to overwhelm you with volume. But Villanueva is probably going to show up and throw a big counter shot. And I don't think Sherman really has the best chin. And he's been getting tagged a lot bare knuckle. That does not help you. I mean, he's probably still feeling the effects from the bare knuckle fights. And also, I think you could see how Jorgen de Castro back in his big knockout win against Tafa was getting backed up against the cage, waited, and threw one big counter shot. And I can see the same thing happen for Villanueva.
Yeah, it's one of those. There's certain fights on this card I think you can't. We mentioned about someone asked about cash plays, top GPP plays. Anthony Smith for me is somebody that I'm looking at. Ricky Simone, Marvin Vettori. You mentioned earlier Alex Hernandez at under 8,000 range is someone to pay attention to. I think there's fighters that are not in my consideration, but someone like a Sarah Morris is not in consideration for me. But for you, who are some of your top GPP plays?
Ooh, top GPP plays. I love Vettori, man. He's not going to be in all my lineups. Anthony Smith's a lock. The more I talk about Hunter Azure, I feel like I'm going to have a decent amount of Hunter Azure and Sajara Eubanks based on the level of their opponents. And I think that the fact that Keller is a good fighter can actually help Hunter Azure, where he can keep getting back to his feet. The only issue is if Hunter Azure doesn't shoot, and it just tends to be a striking match. I don't know if he has the volume to really pay off, but I'm really excited. Probably the two fights I'm looking forward to most is the Vettori fight, but also Ricky Simon against Ray Borg.
Just in terms of fight, Hernandez Dober is my number one fight on this.
Yeah, you know what? I was just overlooking that as well. I think the Hernandez is going to be – it's probably going to be Smith and Hernandez for me, and obviously that's a bold call because you just saw how Drew Dober looked, and Drew Dober has never really looked better. And I think people are also going to notice that Drew Dober's been training with Justin Gaethje. Granted, they train all the time together, but now that Justin won, a lot of people might flock to the teammate. So I'll take slightly the lower percent ownership in Hernandez and hope that it's a grappling match.
Now, if you happen to have any question you think about before Wednesday, hit up myself or Pete on Twitter. I'm at Jason_Floyd. He is at Pete the Heat MMA. Of course, we're always here to answer your questions. We're going to be back on Thursday. We're going to break down the Saturday UFC Fight Night card, Alistair Overeem versus Walt Harris. So be sure to check out that. Be sure to follow Awesemo on Twitter at Awesemo_com. So Pete, anything you want to mention before we get out of here?
No, just enjoy the fights. I mean, the fights are free. It's not pay-per-view on Wednesday. Then we have the big fight on Saturday, like you mentioned. So any questions you guys have, hit us up. Granted, it's a fight. Anything can happen, but I think that we're pretty prepared for this card. More prepared than a lot of people, I'll tell you that. So I'm excited.
And that's going to wrap it up here for the DFS Strategy Show. We're here every time before a UFC event, and we will be back on Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, to break down the Saturday Fight Night card.